The second question is what to visualize, which is related to the question, do I even understand the data that I'm handling in the first place? Now, you may think that this is a no-brainer, right? Obviously, I understand my data before I visualize it, but I can tell you that in many cases, that is not the case. Sometimes when we get data sets, we download data sets from public sources and whatever, we just rush to visualize those data without stopping, caring, and paying attention to whether we really understand what is being depicted in those data, or without consulting with people who know much more than we do about the data set. So the second recommendation related to this question that I have is, whenever you do a project, always partner up with people who know much more than you do about the data. Whenever I do a project about demographics, I partner up with demographers. If I am doing something about economics, I partner up with economists, just to make sure that I get the data right. Because the meaning of the data, the definitions of the variables, for example, that's super important. Because otherwise, it is very easy to rush to conclusions or to rush to visualize the data without understanding the nuances, the peculiarities of the data. Let me just show you an example of how dangerous this can be. A few years ago, a former student of mine, Luis Melgar, who is now a visualization designer at the Wall Street Journal, a visualization journalist, he was working on his capstone project, on the last project, the last large project that students do at the University of Miami, and he wanted to do a long visualization-driven story about homelessness in Florida, people who don't have homes, right, in Florida, homelessness. Well, he gathered data. There's publicly available data. He downloaded data, talked to experts, started visualizing some data and analyzing it. And he came to my office one day with several charts and several maps depicting the data, showing the data. These are just two of the maps that appeared in his story. And when I saw these maps, I was shocked, because these maps show you that there are certain counties in Florida, right, where more than 20%, in this case is by the way, homelessness among students, okay, not overall homelessness, but homelessness among students. So there are several counties in Florida in which 20 or more % of students are homeless. I said, how is this even possible? I mean, this is a humanitarian crisis. 20% is 1 out of 5. 1 out of 5 students in Florida are homeless. How is this even possible? What I was doing was jumping to conclusions without reading the fine print. Because the fine print in this story, and also what Luis explained to me during several meetings, is that it is key to understand what the word homeless means in this context. So in order to understand the data, you need to read the metadata, and you need to read the documentation of the data. To the state of Florida, and I believe that this is true for the rest of the United States, a homeless person is not necessarily someone who doesn't have a home, although that would be a homeless person for sure. What the state of Florida considers a homeless person is someone who doesn't have a permanent home. This has a lot of consequences because, for instance, if a child comes from a poor family who cannot maintain the same home all year round, that student lives with a family who needs to switch homes 2 or 3 times a year because they cannot pay the rent or whatever, or if that child's parents are separated or divorced and that student needs to leave 3 months here, 4 months here, 3 months here, the fact that this student doesn't have a permanent home may automatically make that student become part of the data set of homelessness in Florida. Not because that student doesn't have a home, but because that student doesn't have a permanent home. That student will be considered homeless. So this fact, that doesn't render the visualization wrong or doesn't render the data set wrong. It's only that we need to understand what it is that we're visualizing. Before we visualize it, we need to read the documentation. We need to consult with the people who created the data or analyze the data. And more importantly, and this will connect to another recommendation that I will make to all of you later. It's not that just we need to understand the data ourselves well. It's only that we should explain it to others. So one of the I think one of the wrongest rules, quotation marks between the word rules of data visualization that I heard repeatedly throughout the years is try not to write very much. Just visualize the data, just let the data speak for itself. That's completely wrong. We need to write. We do need to write, and we do need to explain, and we do need to tell. We need to show and tell right, to readers. So if you are designing a story such as this one, just visualizing the data is not enough. You need to also explain, either verbally or textually, to readers what the word homeless means in this context. Because otherwise, readers will jump to the same conclusion as I did, that a homeless person is someone who lives on the streets, right? Rather than a person who doesn't have a permanent home. So visualization is not just about showing data. It is also about explaining data and understanding the data. This is also critical these days. A few months ago, at the beginning of the pandemic, Amanda Makulek, who is the executive director of the Data Visualization Society, which is an organization that I would encourage you to take a look at, because I think that membership is free and there's a community of visualization designers. Anyway, Amanda specializes on the analysis and visualization of health data, of health and healthcare data. And she wrote an article about, at the beginning of the pandemic, the many visualizations that were published at the beginning of the pandemic by people who understood very little, for example, about epidemiology, but still designed tons of graphics about the pandemic. And Amanda called out these efforts, saying, if you want to design a visualization about COVID-19, that's great, but keep it to yourself. Because if you put it out there, right, you have the potential of misinforming other people. If you don't understand the data well, or if you don't explain those data really, really well to other people. This also relates to this idea of caring about the possible responsibility we may have whenever we design a graphic.